welcome everybody. Firstly, members are encouraged to obtain any points of clarification on the reports and the agenda in advance of the meeting, and I'm sure people have done that if they need to. Secondly, members of the public will be invited to speak at the relevant item. Fire evacuation procedures. We don't have any fire alarm scheduled for this evening, so if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the side of this room. Exit through reception and meet at the War Memorial Park. And we are being webcast. And yeah, I'd like to formally welcome our two new parish council representatives and our new independent standards assessor. So, item 1, apologies for absence. We have had an apology from parish councillor Linda Agnew, and we haven't had any substitutions. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Are there any urgent matters for consideration? In that case, minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of June. Is the committee happy that they are an accurate record? Yeah. Excellent. Right, I will sign them before I go. Yep. So now moving on to recruitment of independent person and independent standards assessor update. Hand over to...
Thank you, Chair. This is just an updating report. We had a fairly successful recruitment process in September, October, and we did manage to appoint 2 independent persons and 1 independent standards assessor, and very experienced independent persons with extensive background in investigations and sitting on other standards committees. We also benefited from the advertisement and attracted 2 new parish representatives as well, so it was a good, successful process. We do, however, still have 1 vacancy for an independent standards assessor, and when the chair comes to the end of her term at the end of April next year, there will then be 2 vacancies. So I am recommending that we go out again for recruitment. We have had quite small numbers of complaints at the moment, but if it does get to a situation where we're receiving lots of complaints, then you need quite a few independent people to have different roles in that process. So I'm seeking the committee's approval to conduct another recruitment process for 2 ISAs. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions, comments? And are people happy with the recommendation?
Yes.
Oh. So, moving on to item 6, Code of Conduct Learning and Development Programme. Hand over to Fiona.
Thank you. So we've had 1 training session for borough councillors in June, which unfortunately only attracted 8 councillors to that session. I've arranged another session for the 22nd of January, so that date should be going out to borough councillors soon if it hasn't already. And I'll also be recommending, there's a very good LGA e-learning module, so that if people can't actually attend, I will be asking them to undertake the e-learning and complete the certificate for that, so that people have undertaken the training. In terms of parish councils, myself and my deputy went to Borkhurst Parish Council and did an in-person session in August, which I think went quite well. I've also now arranged a online training session for all parish councillors, whoever wants to attend, on the 16th of January. But we've also, at the same time, we've also been receiving requests for in-person training. So 5 parish councils so far have requested in-person training. So we'll be arranging that in the new year. And just to update in terms of code of conduct adoption by the parish councils, we've done another trawl through websites. We've also now contacted all the parish councils who don't have them on their websites. And my last reckoning was that 25 out of 42 parish councils have adopted the new code. So it's quite good now. It's well over 50%. And there's still a handful that we don't know, we haven't had responses from. So, and some who've purposefully not adopted it, they've decided to stay with their old codes of conduct. But it's much healthier now than it was even a few months ago. So I'm quite pleased with that.
Can I ask which parish councils have asked for a one-to-one training? Interesting. I know about the online one because obviously our council has received it, it's gone out. Be interested to see how many go. Do they also get a certificate if they've attended?
I haven't drafted up a certificate yet. So on the online one, I've had I think it's about 10 parish councillors booked into that at the moment, but they're still coming in every day as the message gets around. In terms of the in-person ones, it's Eastwoody, Burghclere, Highclere, and Old Basing. I think it was Old Basing and Bramley. That's 5, yes.
Yeah, I can only say that we've adopted it because it looks similar to the one that I saw online. I haven't had confirmation of that. What have you've contacted the clerks, have you, regarding the 16th? So if I speak to them, we should be able to circulate. I think it needs a bit more promotion at our end.
Is there a different way for me to communicate? If you think if that's satisfactory, I can, yeah. See, all right, I shall chase it as well.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, Fiona. The online stuff, is there tracking so you can see who's actually done the training? So to keep a sort of, yeah.
I think it's you get a certificate at the end of it. So I'd ask you to send your certificates in to me, so I could then have proof.
Yes, on keeping a record of those who have past training, I remember we talked previously that it was obligatory that all borough councillors undertook the code of conduct training each year. I think it's disappointing that we're halfway through a year and only 8 out of 50, is it, borough councillors? 64, 8 of 54 have taken the training. And if we look at the parish councils, we have we had talked about how we could keep a record of who had and who had not had training. I think somebody was going to see whether it was something that could be recorded with members' declarations of interests so in terms of have we got a way of keeping a record of who has had training and who hasn't, and reporting back in terms of the percentages that have taken training. So I think this is a really important issue.
I can keep records of the borough councillors, so I know exactly who's attended that. And to be fair, I haven't set up another session before now, so it's partly due to my own capacity to put that on, so not put it all on the borough councillors who might not have been able to have attended the first session. And for parishes, I can only really record, it would be dependent on the clerks, I think, telling us, because we can put it on mod.gov, I think, we can record it on the website under their register of interest. But I mean, I can do it for the ones that I know I've trained, but I can't, it would have to be down to the parish clerks to tell us about who's done. Some people do other code of conduct training, I'm assuming, within the parishes, because there are other online versions of it.
you going to say? I was just going to say it might be worth sending out a reminder, I think, to people, because I think I sort of vaguely recall seeing that, but you know, we have many emails who will get, so. I mean, and especially with the online one, because the online one will be a good one to easier people to do, and then obviously if you get a certificate, then we've got a way of tracking it.
I am very concerned that we don't really have any knowledge of who has done training within the parishes. We've got, if we have a number of parish councillors and we are reliant on parish clerks to keep a record of whether their councillors have undergone appropriate training, and taking generic training when the code of conduct that has to be adopted or should be adopted is the template that Basingstoke have adopted. And I think you said, was it 25 now have adopted the Basingstoke code of conduct, in that where we have issues of complaints, if the council does not have the standard code of conduct, then the assessors have to go through and find the details of the council's adopted code of conduct. And I don't think many councils understand the differences in code of conduct between template A or template B or that which is the borough council one. The difficulty for the borough council is that this group then has to deal with a very variable standard. So I'm really don't want to see this one drop in terms of keeping a record of which councillors have undergone training.
I don't know how I can impose myself on some of the parish councils to tell me, because it's up to the parish councils to ensure that their councillors have received the necessary training. It doesn't all have to go through the borough. There are other ways of getting the training. I don't know if you've got any suggestions, Councillor Slatford, as to how I can get that information, because they don't always communicate.
I think that, as with many things, one has to have a target. The target needs to be that you will have gone through training, you will be recorded. If you are not recorded, then there will be some withdrawal of privileges or some challenge to the council. If there's no threat, if there's no stick, then we're not going to see much improvement. The only people for whom the adoption of a standardised code of conduct are within this room. And if we don't really concern ourselves about it, then there is no pressure on the parishes to adopt or even look at their code of conduct. Once a year, they should look at that as one of their policies. But that isn't necessarily the case, unless it is seen to be an important issue, in the same way as wearing clothes in public is fairly important. Then I don't think we're going to see any improvement.
I might have a suggestion, Martin. I don't know whether it will help. But you're right about sort of carrot and stick, but obviously the forums that actually communicate with others. I know that I'm no longer the chair or vice chair of Tadley Town Council, but when I was the chair, we used to get the regular update from the Basingstoke and District Association of Town and Parish Council, which is a mouthful anyway, but we used to get the minutes, which used to be circulated round to our councillors, and in there there'll be information about things that people should be doing. I don't know whether they still do that, a sort of newsletter type thing with information in saying, you know, why it's important, why this information is there. Whether or not that's something that the current setup has able to do, and maybe the borough can help produce it, and obviously it can go out electronically, but again, it needs to go to the clerks to circulate to councillors, because the borough doesn't have the email of every individual councillor. Some of the councils have emails that are council emails, and some councils still have personal emails. Not all consistency out in the sticks, as we might call it. So I think it is quite difficult. But it might be that working with the Basingstoke Association, we can actually come up with some messages that actually strengthen the fact that, you know, we would expect everyone to adopt the code of conduct. And you're quite right. We have in the past had issues where a council hadn't adopted the code of conduct, and therefore we were unable to apply the same Nolan principles that we would do to a one that people had adopted, because it didn't include some areas. It was out of date. It didn't include some of the new areas that were to be included now. And that presents a problem, because people who perhaps should have been held before the Standards Committee weren't, because they weren't being judged against the code, because in the code it didn't demand certain things. So I think it's important, but getting that message out there to all the parish councils, which must be well in their hundreds, if not more, across the whole of the borough with 42 councils. It's an awful lot of work that needs to be done. And maybe it's up to us that are in the parish and town family, if you like, to go out and press those buttons. But that's just a thought.
I just had a thought as you were speaking that having a stick, as you phrased it, isn't necessarily going to be especially helpful, because this is a voluntary adoption. There are plenty of parishes that are opting not to do it, and if we're seen as imposing even more rigorous and strict requirements once they have adopted it, that will probably deter councils that are potentially wavering one way or another. So I think a more positive approach, you know, a carrot rather than a stick, is probably a better way to go, so that we're not putting those parishes off that might otherwise be considering adopting it.
My question really is more for Fiona and Fiona's group, that if all of the parish councils decided to adopt the code of conduct, and therefore training would need to be given, and like Old Basing and Lichpit, in-person training had been requested, could you absorb all of that? And if not, how would we apply the carrot as well as the stick?
No, I couldn't do every parish council in the borough. This is a bit of a test, really, a pilot, to see how many actually want it in person and how many are happy to have it online. I should have said also that we are arranging a clerks meeting, which used to happen fairly regularly and hasn't for a while. So that's another avenue for me to try and press for the adoption of the code and to get people to training as well. So that might assist.
And therefore, a follow-up to that, if the clerks could be brought on board, would they also be able to provide some of the training or some of the reporting that Martin's asked for? So it becomes more of a train the trainer rather than you going out with your flip chart and OHPs.
It's very much more PowerPoint nowadays, isn't it? No, that's a good idea. I suppose the other issue that Martin's already made at previous meetings is the people that attend these things are not normally the ones that need the encouragement. So it's sometimes it's trying to get to the harder to reach clerks and parish councils that's the tricky bit. So, but no, it's a good idea actually. Maybe they can go out to others. I'm sure they haven't got time to do that either.
Can I pick up firstly on Joe's point? The district association, the chair of the district association stood down something like about a year ago. We don't have a chair. We have a vice chair in me, and I'll be standing down next May, and we've been unable to have anyone stand up to become part of the district association to do the regular newsletters. The fact that we're here, parish councils, and the offer that Fiona made to train the parish councils is because we put through a number of occasions where we had meetings, attendances, making clear the importance of code of conduct training. and training to code of conduct, that included the Nolan principles. In my council, we've got about half the council were co-opted within the last 12 months. They still really are fairly vague about the Nolan principles. So that sort of basic attitude in terms of how we should behave is not yet clearly through, even though Fiona came along and provided that face-to-face training for all bar me, in that I wasn't at that meeting. So I haven't had code of conduct training in this round. I do pick up the point in terms of the carrot that we were providing was that it is in the council's interest to have a code of conduct which is reviewed regularly by Basingstoke and is appropriate for parishes. The code of conduct which is appropriate for the borough is different to that for parishes, and we have taken the trouble to make sure that the template for parishes doesn't include references to town clerks or the points in place there. So there's been a lot of work done in that direction. So the carrot is not really working. A stick, I agree, we cannot have a stick, and there is very little in the way of punishment for people that do break the code of conduct. I know that's something that is in discussion with government. But I think that if we say that it really matters that you are registered to have had your code of conduct training, in the same way as it really matters that you declare the interest as to assets that you have in the village or contracts that you have in the village, which are recorded by the borough for every councillor, I think that that really should include the register of have you had training in code of conduct, and what training was that you had and when was it? If it's appropriate for borough councillors to have retraining on code of conduct once a year, what is the frequency at which parish councillors should have retraining? So I think the key element here is not to have a stick or a carrot. We have tried the carrot. We have tried to go out to the community over the last 3 years to try and make sure that people realise the importance and do want to. It's obvious they don't want to. So therefore, if we turn around and say, I don't really know whether you've had it or not, doesn't really matter, then there is no real incentive to training, and I think that's really important.
I was going to suggest maybe we could make a recommendation, Fiona, that we look at this process. I think is actually to avoid this sort of idea of a punitive or an encouraging aspect, but have it as a sort of standard process. If people have got to do a declaration of interest, that's par for the course. And I think it was said, I don't know if it was Martin, but somebody said about putting it in at the same time. So if we do that and it goes out, so when you become a councillor, it's just an expectation that you will do the online course, get your certificate, you pass across your declaration of interest and your certificate, and then it's done. And it's just it's just a part of the course, and that shouldn't put too much pressure on yourself and your team.
That seems a very good, sensible suggestion. Yeah, and also I think the fact that you're having a meeting of parish clerks seems a very good idea as well, and try and get some communication going. Yep, and hopefully get parish clerks talking to each other as well.
I'm sorry, the parish clerks meeting, at its peak, the clerks meeting, there would be perhaps a dozen councils represented out of 42. It then reduced to around about 6 to 8 clerks who would take part. And there was a real problem in terms of identifying whether the clerks meeting was in the daytime or the evening, in that some clerks are professional and therefore they would go to meetings in the daytime. The majority of clerks are volunteer or have other jobs, and therefore they need meetings in the evening. So the clerks' meetings were moved from evening to daytime. That excluded 3/4 of the clerks, and that was the issue that was there. We also had a problem that officers were presenting to clerks and then coming along to the Basingstoke District Association of Parish and Town Councils and presenting. So we were working with Councillor Bound to look at amalgamating the sessions so that where the sessions were appropriate to both the chairman and vice chair and representatives of the councillors, as well as the officers, the clerks of the parish and town councils, the meetings were at the similar time. So if I provide a bit of history there, if there is a way that the training could be provided at the end of a late afternoon meeting with clerks or before the early evening meeting of the district association, that may save energy and effort.
I think in the absence of a legal stick, so to speak, or any sort of legal sanction, I think I would suggest we appeal to councillors' self-interest, because any one of us could be on the receipt of a complaint which is spurious or otherwise. I think if councillors have adopted, or if parish councils have adopted the code, then in the same way as ignorance of the law is no defence, neither is ignorance of the code, and it's in their interests to be fully aware of it. In that regard, I think the difficulty with face-to-face training is I used to train police officers, and you can guarantee that if I trained a group of police officers in January, by June they would all have changed. I could give the same training again, and so on and so forth. So the online is a very good option in that regard. Bearing in mind that 16th of January is not that far away, taking into account Christmas, will it be recorded? Is there going to be an option for parish councillors to watch a recording? Or is it something that could be repeated maybe a couple of months later? Because I think online is going to guarantee the most exposure. But certainly from my perspective, having come to this meeting, I will be going back to the parish council and encouraging take-up, because I think that's probably the best way of getting people to access it. If it could be recorded so they could watch it in their own time, that would be even better.
Yes, it's it'll be done on Teams, so I can record it, and certainly, yeah.
Sorry, any more comments, suggestions, questions? So I think we've had a couple of suggestions noted, yep. Great. So moving on to item 7, which is the complaints update report.
So again, I'm happy to say it's quite light. So since the last meeting in June, we've received 4 new complaints. Two of which were dismissed right at the outset because they didn't relate to council business and therefore didn't invoke the code of conduct. 1 complaint was resolved by informal action, an apology, and there's currently 1 ongoing at the moment. So it's quite good news at the moment in terms of the low number.
Is there a split between borough councillors and parish councillors out of those 4, please?
Yeah, it's three parish and 1 borough.
New as I am, I'm going to ask a question around analysis and what kind of analysis happens on complaints and what kind of reporting comes to this committee to demonstrate repeat complaints, not necessarily repeat people, but the types of complaints that are coming through that would then lead to action that might then lead to reduction overall in complaints, that kind of thing.
So part of the schedule is about learning from the complaints. I mean, if we had more going through with actual outcomes, then we would present something much more analytical. At the moment, there's nothing really tangible to bring back to you. But certainly we do an annual report as well, where we report on the whole year. But yes, if there was something coming out in terms of learning, we would have a discussion about that here.
from my memory, I don't think there are any particular themes, are there? No. No. Are the committee happy to note the progress?
Yeah.
Right. And on to item 8, which is the work programme.
So just say very happy to receive any suggested work programme items. You'll see for March, actually there is a more substantive item I'm proposing, which is the revised probity and planning code of practice. So it builds on the code of conduct, but it's specific to planning applications and development control and anything around planning about lobbying and developers. So it should provide some more engagement, I would suggest. It probably also needs to go to the Development Control Committee as well at the council for their input. So that will be a bit more substantive item at that point. Otherwise, it's just updates on what we've said today, and we will have the draft annual report at that meeting as well.
At the last time they updated the local government updated the code of conduct, there were a number of items that were still outstanding, which were being referred back to government. I'm making an assumption, because we haven't heard anything, that those things are still sitting in the tray, in somebody's minister's tray, and we were looking at certain things that might need to be changed. Well, and the law needs to be changed, otherwise we couldn't actually move forward. But one of the questions I know that often now we're getting asked about is social media. And I know that they've got a new code of conduct with social media information. But one of the things I'm aware of, having spoken to a number of other borough councillors, is I don't know how much the borough councils themselves have picked up that that is a code and part of the code, and that there is some guidance on it. So when we invite them all to the meeting, if they don't come, maybe actually point them to where that is found. Because I had a discussion with somebody who's been nameless, who said that they'd never seen it, and I said, well, you have had it sent around to you, I can assure you, but you know, it's always useful to emphasise that there are things that are changing, because just because you came on the training course 4 years ago doesn't mean that's what it is today, because things are moving forward, although not quite as quickly as we thought it might do. But you know, at the moment there are things stuck there, but I'm sure if those things come forward, they will come on this committee anyway.
It's just to say, in terms of the response to the ethical standards review, there hasn't been any further movement from there was only a couple of recommendations from that the government were going to take further, which included strengthening the sanctions for serious bullying and harassment, which was probably the most serious one, but we've not seen anything yet. But I think actually what I could do is, in terms of the borough councillors get a briefing every other week, we could start putting sort of standards updates in that as well. That might be a good way of messaging it, yeah.
Sorry, apologies, turn on my microphone again. Any other comments, questions, suggestions, ideas? What do people want to think about possible things to go in the work programme going forward? And bring it to the next meeting. Right. So, item 9 is exclusion of press and public. And then item 10, there are no confidential exempt items. So, in that case, does anyone have any other business? And in that case, thank you for coming, and I'll draw this meeting to a close and see everyone in March.
Yeah, nice meeting.
Yes, yeah.